Back when charter schools were first created in different states in the United States, their proponents sold them as a way to spend less on schools and get more. They told legislators that students would receive a superior education at a lower cost. But now, these same charter proponents are going to courts all around the country claiming that charter schools are underfunded and that they should receive the same amount of money that neighborhood schools do, even though they don't provide anywhere near the same level of services. One of the very first lawsuits of this kind was filed in Arizona, and a recent ruling by the Arizona Court of Appeals may have widespread ramifications. In November, the Arizona Court of Appeals ruled against Arizona charter schools, saying they did not have a constitutional claim for their quote-unquote equity argument. The justices did not even deal with the issue of whether the schools actually receive more money or not. The justices simply said that because the charter school plaintiffs said that their children were receiving an adequate education at their charter school, that the state constitutional requirement that schools be adequately funded was met. The justices also said that because parental enrollment of their children at charter schools is entirely voluntary and that parents could at any time enroll their children in neighborhood schools that they believe are more properly funded, that there was in essence no harm and no constitutional violation. I have to say, it was quite just seeing the charter school proponents who repeatedly twist the facts on this issue get hoisted on their own petard by the courts. And given previous rulings by the Arizona Supreme Court on related school funding issues, I don't think the Supreme Court justices will reverse this Arizona Court of Appeals decision. Now, most charter school parents are under the misimpression that their children's schools are funded at a lower level. And I don't really want to blame charter school parents for the misinformation that they spread in repeating this myth, because it is fed to them by the charter school operators, their paid advocates and lobbyists who quite frankly know better. Although charter school advocates sold this concept to state legislatures in various states as being a more cost-effective way to educate children, charter schools in Arizona actually receive more funding than neighborhood schools. How is that possible, you ask? Well, here is the Cliff Notes version of how it works. Charter schools and neighborhood schools receive almost the same amount in what is called basic funding, which is about $3,700 for an elementary to middle school student and $4,100 for a high school student. But then charter schools are given several additional sources of funding from the state. The first is called additional assistance. This is supposed to make up for the fact that charters cannot ask voters to pass bonds or overrides. Charter schools receive between $1,600 and almost $1,900 more a year per student. So remember, you start with $3,700 to $4,100 a year, but if you're a charter school, you receive an automatic 43% bump on that base amount. The most that school districts can request in a maintenance and operating override is 15% above and beyond an operating budget. The most districts can request in a bond election is 5 to 10%. So this additional funding for charters is assuming that all school districts pass their bonds and overrides. But do they? No, absolutely not. During the recession, override and bond passage was very low. In 2012, almost 60% of them failed. The pass rate was better this past election cycle, but by no means is this guaranteed funding. However, for charter schools, additional assistance is guaranteed funding. Another way in which charter schools benefit is a loophole that was created by the legislature, which gives each individual charter school an extra $800 per student if they're registered a specific way. The small school funding was meant to go to small public schools that do not have the benefit of economies of scale. However, large charter chains like Basis have subverted the original intent of this law by chartering each individual campus as a separate charter school, which means that they all receive the $800 small school exception when they really shouldn't, because they're part of a multi-million-dollar operation. One of the other ways that charters bring in additional funds are through private donations, either from foundations, individuals, or parents. These numbers, which total in the hundreds of thousands to millions, are not documented in the state breakdown of revenue to schools. In addition, when you look at the comparison of dollar for dollar revenue to schools, the charter advocates will often claim that neighborhood schools receive more funding because they lump in revenue received for transportation, school lunches, and special education. If charters provided transportation, school lunches, and special education, then they too would receive those funds, but most of them don't, so it's really misleading to include them in any totals. It would be like me saying to the state that I should receive a refund on my taxes for charitable donations because my neighbor got one, even though I had made absolutely no charitable donations myself. That is how misleading those numbers actually are. So what really needs to happen, in my opinion, is a lawsuit in the other direction, claiming that charter schools are receiving unfair advantages that are not afforded neighborhood schools and that do violate the state constitutional requirements of equal protection and adequate school funding.